It's Friday, November the 25th, 2022.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the host of Sam Talks Technology.
In the chapters today, Spotify audiobooks rolls out to more countries and Anchor adds audio enhancement.
This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,600 wonderful people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
So, to kick things off this week, last week we talked about Spotify rolling out video podcasting, James, globally. This week, James, they've rolled out audiobooks globally. Well, I say globally, in the English-speaking languages. It's in the UK, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand. So have you had a look at the audiobooks that have been added, James?
It's not a great experience, certainly in iPhone, by the looks of what you've been sharing with me.
Yeah, I went in. I'm an Audible user, have been for many years, and love listening to audiobooks. So I thought, oh, go on, I'll have a look. The first thing I'll say is it's not obvious where it is. It's not on the home page. You have to click on the search page and then suddenly podcasts and audiobooks and everything else turns up there. So in terms of UI, I don't think it's a great first experience. But once you get in there, yeah, it's very much everything's in there. So I went on my phone. I thought, right, I'll go and see if I can buy something. And of course, the message I got was, you can't buy audiobooks in the app. We know it's not ideal. Yep, you have to go back to the desktop and then you have to be jumped out, as we thought before, and then pay for it if you want to pay for it there.
And that's an Apple thing, isn't it? It's not really anything else going on there.
No, I mean, my question is, and maybe I'm just being naive, but why doesn't Spotify just remove themselves from the App Store and just that the big enough brand now, everyone knows who they are. I don't know, just go to, Spotify.com and then on there you can download the iOS and Android apps.
Well, yes, that would be nice, but you can't sideload iOS. You can sideload Android, and perhaps that's something that they might do, although Fortnite was very upset about doing that sort of thing. But you can't, unfortunately, sideload Apple apps because, Tim Apple wants to look after all of that kind of stuff, doesn't he? But yeah, interesting seeing them doing that. Also interesting to see that you're a fan of the Style Council. You were listening in the kitchen to Boy Who Cried Wolf. So there we are. That's all good. It's not the only thing that Spotify has launched this week, is it?
No, I got a little message saying they've updated notifications. The first thing I went was, did they have notifications before? But they must have done. But I went and had a look in the notifications and it's become much more extensive. You've got obviously music and artists, but podcasts and show recommendations, audiobooks. What was also interesting was live streams, virtual events, and also there was a bit there about offers, bundles. So it suddenly looked like they were getting more into, and the other one at the bottom, artist and creator merchandise. So suddenly it looks like they've really upped their game in terms of what they're going to be offering.
Yeah.
If you're a creator, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe they're going to be promoting all kinds of, tickets and T-shirts and stuff. I think they've been doing a little bit of that, but maybe not in the notifications. So, that's certainly something that Spotify's been doing. And also, Anchor has had a little bit of an upgrade as well. They've added audio enhancement to their app. A single tap can automatically reduce background noise while leveling your voice and bringing it to the forefront. Sounds very similar to Buzzsprout's Magic Mastering to me, and probably is exactly the same technology under the hood. Descript also have studio sound in there as well. But so there we were thinking that Spotify had finished spending money on their Anchor product, but no, they're adding audio enhancement into there.
Well, they've added video, haven't they? So it looks like they are going to be pushing ahead with whatever Anchor is going to be in the future. Now, the other thing I noted was that you had a little tip from Helena talking about Adobe is also offering a free speech enhancement tool currently available.
Yeah.
So you can take your MP3 and do something similar, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I think that's basically how the thing works. It's hiding away at podcast.adobe.com. There's a link to it in the top, and seems to be much the same sort of thing. They also have a thing called a mic check tool, which is supposed to tell you whether or not your microphone is any good. I can't get it to work at all, so I don't know whether that's good or bad. Who knows? But they're sort of slowly but surely adding all of that kind of stuff. I last saw Adobe when I was at the NAB show about 3 years ago, before some thing called a pandemic. I don't know whether you had that, Sam. But yes, so it'll be interesting to see quite what they're doing in terms of rolling stuff out. But good for Adobe. Spotify also signing exclusives as well. I always thought that they'd stopped, but no, they're continuing to sign exclusives. Anything goes with Emma Chamberlain. Have you ever heard of Emma Chamberlain?
No, this one I haven't heard of. But the background to it is it's another loss for the owner of Odyssey. So she's moving across from Odyssey. No, not one of my 5 or 6 podcast regular listens, I'm afraid. No, not indeed. She's apparently a big YouTube influencer. And the show was with Odyssey, as you say, with Cadence 13, but it's actually from the Ramble Podcast Network, which is co-founded by UTA, which is a big talent agency as well. Now, moving on to friend of the show, Dan Meisner at Bumper. He's been busy, hasn't he, with this Apple podcast tagging that they've been doing in the background. He's now created some new episodic topic maps, which I thought looked really cool when I went and had a look at them. Did you have a play at all, James?
Yeah, they did look pretty cool. So this is the topics that Apple is automatically working out what you're talking about in your show. And they may be doing that for better search. They may be doing that perhaps for weeding out people who are talking about things that they shouldn't be. But however it works, what Dan did is he's ended up producing these wonderful spiderweb maps for every single category in Apple Podcasts. So you can see how individual shows link together, both by topics as well as by recommendations. So it's a really cool piece of work that Dan has done. The website is wearebumper.com.
And you, just to remind people, did something as well.
Yeah, I did. So this was last week. I ended up producing something which was a fancy little topics viewer, so you could actually see what Apple thought that your podcast was about if it's big enough. So that's worthwhile having a peek at. You'll find that linked from our show notes.
Now, we were talking about Anchor making a little bit of a comeback with video and enhanced audio. But Libsyn seems it's closing its free podcast hosting platform, which it only opened 9 months ago, James. Why is that?
It did. Why is that? So the idea behind Libsyn Studio was that it was the tool that they'd bought when they bought AuxBus, and it's a tool that allows you to record an intro and record the main bit of your podcast and record an outro, and then automatically grab that and stick it up as a podcast. And the way that it was going to pay for itself was through advertising. And there was space in there for adverts, and that's how Libsyn's free podcast host was going to be. And it worked so well, they've closed it down just 9 months after they actually launched it. They've now given the recording tool to all paid Libsyn plans. So if you are spending money with Libsyn, then you can use that particular tool instead. It's a pretty nifty tool if you don't necessarily want to use, Descript or Hindenburg or any of those tools. But there they are. But I think Dave Jackson keeps a list of free podcast hosts that have launched, failed, and gone away again, and that's clearly one of them, which I think is going to be interesting. So they've definitely migrated away. One of the things that I found interesting, though, is I had a Libsyn Studio account, and I tried logging into it, and they seem to have given me a Libsyn 5 account, and there doesn't seem to be anything in there in terms of billing. And I was able to upload a new version of the that free podcast that I was playing around with. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But anyway, it's great that companies are trying things and testing things, but that's another free podcast host which has bitten the dust.
Now, moving on, an interesting company that you wrote about called Zeitpedia. I think that's how you'd say it. It's a new kind of podcast network that's using generative AI voices to produce audio news digests. There are some examples of a World Cup news podcast that was totally generated using AI. Had a listen to it. It's still fairly robotic, but it's getting better. Did you listen to the business or technology one?
Yeah, you can tell that it's a robot. You can tell that the timing isn't quite right. And there was another one that I linked to another company that's doing something similar with sports results as well last week. It's just that the timing isn't correct. I think these services are getting better in terms of pronunciation, but it's just the timing and the phrasing just doesn't really work too well. But, things will get better, I'm sure.
Yeah, we talked about previously a company called Verbit, a voice AI platform that does transcriptions as well. That raised $250 million to do this and now has a valuation in less than 5 years of $2 billion. We obviously have talked in the past about Descript's overdub that you've used. My question, James, to you is, would you ever use one of these AI tools to produce Pod News Daily?
I don't think I'd produce it a full show using that, and Pod News Daily is only 4 or 5 minutes long. It's quite short today because it's Thanksgiving in the US. Who'd have thought it? There's no podcast news going on. But yeah, I wouldn't use it for that. I have used it in the past, and I've used it once on this show. And in fact, episode 100 of Series 1 of the old show starts with the date, and I managed to get the month wrong, and neither of us recognized that when we were recording it. And so I thought to myself, right, well, either I can go back into the office and record me saying that correctly and splice it all in and everything else, but I was using Descript to edit it, and so I just used overdub, and you simply could not tell. And the last Podland, it's Friday the 4th of November 2022. I'm James Cridden, so it's good for 1 or 2 words that you fluff, not necessarily so great for recording an entire podcast with yet, I don't think.
Maybe they need to add some more ums and ers into the robotic version to make it sound more realistic.
Yes, maybe. Or, if they're going to do things like Joe Rogan does, maybe just to add the words "wow" and "exactly"
or "crazy." Yes, there is a study out that says Joe Rogan's podcast use those words more often than not. And it said, my favourite murder, that's another podcast, favours the words wow, totally, and man.
Totally.
It's better than when I was at Microsoft where every word was super. The question is, though, I do find this interesting. It goes back to what Dan Meisner's doing with what Apple is doing under the hood with keywords. And I think it's great that if you've got transcript keyword analysis, I mean, in the UK, just on an aside, they use keyword transcript analysis for Liz Truss when she was the PM. And her word cloud of keywords keyword was untrustworthy, liar, idiot, useless. Rishi Sunak's was rich, good, capable.
Yes.
I would love to do this across podcasts. I think it's a fascinating thing to analyse how podcast words are used. Yeah,
no, I think it's a really interesting tool. So again, bringing in more details from transcripts, and more people should be doing transcripts, is obviously a very helpful thing. I think that would be a super useful thing to end up doing. So it's a smart tool.
Transcript clouds coming soon. Oh, just by an aside, also, I think it was interesting. The Sun did an analysis of Meghan Markle. I think you wrote about this. She actually speaks more than her guests on her shows. So I know they're not a fan of Meghan, but that would be a good thing.
Yes, every day I have to go through the podcast news, and about 20% of it is all newspapers writing about what Meghan Markle said this week on her podcast, and how can we slag her off this time. Yes, this piece, somebody basically sat with the Meghan Markle Archetypes podcast and with a stopwatch to work out how much Meghan Markle talked and how much the guests that she's supposed to be interviewing talked. which is another way of being mean to Meghan. I did notice that there was another story today, which I didn't even bother covering, which is apparently Meghan doesn't necessarily interview some of the guests that she is interviewing on the podcast. Apparently that's a producer's job, and she just goes in and records the questions afterwards, which is
busy lady.
Interesting if
busy
true.
Lady.
But I'm sure it's not true.
Well, you never know.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
One of the things, obviously, we're all watching is the either implosion of Twitter or the rebirth of Twitter. I don't know which way it's going to go. But on a more positive note, Noam Bardin, who started Wave, which was sold to Google, has launched Post.
Why is this positive? Another CEO, another bloke launching another social media thing that he'll get bored with, just like Musk. What's the positive there?
Well, it contains micropayments. That's the first thing. The second thing, I listened to an interview of Noam on Pivot this week with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, and they're talking about keeping the conversation, away from some of the more extreme edges, trying to build a reputation algorithm into it, and just simply the way that they're
more
doing
algorithms.
it.
That's what we need.
Well, I think his view
reputation algorithm. Who sets the reputation algorithm then?
Actually, the way that it's done, by all accounts, is user-driven. So what he said was Waze, when they got it, had various country leaders and they had area leaders, and people in the community would determine what was going on with roads and local issues. And he wants to do the same.
Yeah.
He gave an example of, the troubles in Myanmar. He said, look, I wouldn't know what was right or wrong, but if we have people locally who know what's going on, they can validate whether the tweet, or in this, I don't know whether it's going to be called a tweet or a post, is actually worth taking down or keeping up or downgrading in the algorithm or whatever. It's very early days. There's about 100,000 people on a waiting list. There's 3,000 people using it at the moment. I guess it's a centralized alternative to Twitter, and I just think it'll be interesting. But the thing I was most excited about, and I'll be honest, was that they are using micropayments, and it looks like a value-for-value type platform.
Yeah, which will be good. I mean, frankly, I couldn't be less interested in some other tech person launching a social network with algorithms and with all of this kind of stuff and another centralized system. We've got lots of those. We don't need more of those. It's the last thing that we want. The interesting thing on the other side is that ActivityPub, which of course is the thing that powers Mastodon, but also powers Pleroma, that is going to be also added into Tumblr as well. And Tumblr is massive. It's owned by the good folk at Automatic, who also own Pocket Casts. And, it's a very, very large service. If they add ActivityPub into that as well, then all of a sudden, Mastodon is going to get much, much bigger, and all of the other services which are connected into it. So that's going to be quite interesting to have a look at too.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't actually reactivated my Tumblr account. Do you have one, James?
Oh, I might have had a Tumblr account a long, long time ago, but yes, as to whether or not it's still there, I would guess probably not.
Yeah. Well, on December the 15th, Matt Mullenberg is going to give the State of the Word review of the year. So maybe, and he'll give a little update on Tumblr, I suppose, in there, because he's going to be talking about the future, and he's going to be showing graphs and stuff. That's what his tweet said.
Graphs and stuff. I wonder how much he'll be talking about Pocket Casts in there as well, because that'll be interesting to end up seeing, because obviously, he's owned Pocket Cast for the last 6 months now, or possibly even longer. So that'll be interesting to see whether that makes it into his State of the Word.
Now, Todd, a friend of the show, Todd Cochran, left a little tweet, said, with the total freak out on Twitter, it serves people right to have built their marketing empires there. Now they may once again start to value the value of owning their stack and their own .com. And I just thought, James, chance for you.
Their own .com. own their own.com. It is. It's a chance for me, isn't it? But yeah, he is absolutely right. It was interesting. I was at a radio station the other day, and I was talking to them about what's going on in the world in terms of technology, and they were very excited about, they want to post a bit more to Facebook and they want to post a bit more to Twitter. And I was there saying, why do you want to bolster somebody else's business? Why do you want to push Zuckerberg's business more? What's the point of that? Oh, well, we should be getting our content on there. No, you should be getting people to listen to your radio station. You shouldn't be pumping your content into some other American company's system. And yes, I was getting a little bit grumpy, but there we are. Which is why I think I'm rather more interested and excited about things like Mastodon and things like those sorts of services, because at the end of the day, you're not necessarily building somebody else's empire here. You're producing stuff that talks to other people, but it can be your own server. And one of the things that I've been spending an awfully long time today is trying to fix the nightmare that is my Mastodon server. Got rid of it. And I've got a Pleroma server on there instead. You can still find me on Mastodon if you search for James at Cridland.net, I think. You'll find me there. But I'm much more excited about that sort of thing. And what you can then end up doing with those sorts of services is you can do interesting things with RSS feeds as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So Mastodon has just passed over 2 million active monthly users, which is a new record according to Mastodon. So people are voting with their feet. As you said, if you add .rss to the end of someone's account page, you get their RSS feed. And actually, Benjamin Bellamy over at Castopod said, if your podcast is hosted on Castopod, your audience can listen to your episodes from Mastodon, but also like, share, and comment them. And thanks to the Podcast Index cross-app comment tag, this could work from any Podcasting 2.0 app, because obviously, Castopod is supporting the Activity Pub as well.
Indeed, and it'll be nice to see more people doing that. I mean, obviously, if you've got access to something like a Mastodon or a Pleroma instance, then you can actually leave messages. It's far, far easier and simpler that way. So perhaps that's the plan there.
Apple doesn't like these RSS feeds, so you can't add them to your Apple account if you have one. And also, the other thing to note, if you do start adding, James, this is you, if you do start adding or allowing people to add a podcast in the enclosures in Mastodon, it adds significant extra cost to your server's bandwidth bill. So maybe you might want to do that one.
It does, yes. That would be a bad plan.
Now, other apps that are out there that have been updating. Pat Chung, who's the founder of Podinbox, announced they now have automatic audio transcriptions, and it's free. And he said it's a bit like visual voicemail, and it lets you conveniently read audio messages from fans before listening to them. So, Podinbox is something that we haven't used, or I haven't used properly, but it's a way of getting feedback from your listeners who leave little messages.
Yeah, cross-app comments would be even better, wouldn't it? And Justin Jackson has tweeted from Transistor FM, has tweeted, now when you upload an MP3 with chapters to Transistor FM, you can insert those chapters as timestamps in your show notes. It's like having your show notes populate automatically. Actually, that's a really smart trick. What I've been doing when I've been putting this very podcast onto YouTube is doing exactly that, because those timestamps turn into clickable links that you can then use to navigate. And I was having lunch with Nick from Visi earlier on this week when I was down in Sydney, and he was pointing out that Spotify does exactly the same. So if you put your timestamps in as information into your show notes, then they'll appear in there as well, which is quite neat. So perhaps that's something that, on certain platforms would be quite useful. So, so worthwhile sort of taking a look at, and whether or not you could do something quite neat. And if it's Spotify coming and asking for your RSS feed, then it would automatically add those chapters into a list for you. That would be quite a nice tool that an enterprising podcast host could end up making.
I like the idea that Justin's put forward. I've said before, though, in the past, why do we have 3 different places that do very similar things? Show notes, chapters and transcriptions. Because if you look at a Word document with an outliner, the chapter headers are the outliner, and then the content is the actual show notes or the transcription. And often when I do it for this podcast, I'm actually replicating in 3 different places similar data. And I just think...
and I agree. And there's a proposal, is it a PIMP? A proposal for improvement of podcasting. There's a proposal in the Podcast Index 2.0 thing of a 4th place, because obviously we need a 4th place. And Daniel J. Lewis and a couple of other folk who are all friends of the show, but they're suggesting that a 4th place would go in there of things like, telephone numbers and email addresses and action points and everything else. And I'm in the comments rather grumpily trying to stop that from happening, because it's a silly idea. But anyway, go into the GitHub and have a play with that if that sounds interesting to you.
Now, Cast-O-Matic's got a new version, 8.5.12. It's available on the stores for both Apple and Google. It now includes cloud chapters, which reload every time an episode is resumed. So well done to Cast-O-Matic.
Yeah, which is quite cool in case somebody has actually updated those chapters to add more information. And Podverse is now available on iPad and Android in a tablet form. That's version 4.7, which you can go and get, which looks all very fancy and very nice. It's surprising how few podcast apps have a decent looking tablet experience. So good to see Podverse doing exactly that. It's Black Friday, whatever that is. Being English, I've got no idea. But anyway, Rode is pretty well giving away a piece of streaming software that it launched a couple of months ago called Unify. Unify is a virtual mixer that allows streamers and games to take full control of their audio. It's basically routing and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. Normally it costs around 70 Australian dollars for a year, but the price is just $1 Australian dollar for the year until November the 30th. So that's quite a significant saving. Also, Riverside, I noticed while I was logging in to this very podcast, is offering half-price annual plans. So that's probably worthwhile jumping into, and that's already a healthy saving. So that's worthwhile having a look at. And Studio Dragonfly, who produced the podcast music for this very podcast, produced it for the old show, produced it for lots of other podcasts as well. They're running a Black Friday sale of 50% off everything on their website. So if you want some production music, if you want some sound effects, if you want some beds, then go for your life. Get to studiodragonfly.com. We use them, and probably you should too.
Black Friday. Other deals are available. Now, don't know why I said that. Feel like I was on the radio again. Around the world, very quickly. I saw you wrote this, James. Audio Drama Hub's Podfest was held in High Wycombe, which is literally about 10 minutes from where I live. I knew nothing about this. It took over the place at the weekend, and if you want, you can go to Pod News and you can see some of the pictures and highlights. But I don't know who's running it, and I don't know what they were trying to achieve with it. I heard nothing about it.
Yes, that was the first that I had heard about it as well. So just seeing the pictures and the highlights, they posted it on the Fediverse, as we have to say these days. And I thought, that's very exciting. But yes, I'd not heard of that before either. But all around audio drama and that sort of thing, they should come to pod.events next time and stick it in there. And who knows, we could have given it a bit more of a push. There's also stuff going on here in Australia. News Corp is using Apple Podcast paid subscriptions a little bit more. They've put all of their true crime podcasts into there. Of course, one of their true crime podcasts is The Teacher's Pet, which was a very, very big hit. And some figures have come out from New Zealand as well. The Infinite Dial was published by Edison Research. 39% of adults in the country are monthly podcast listeners, which means that more Kiwis are listening to podcasts than Americans, according to the data. And also 30% are weekly podcast listeners, which is a significantly higher figure than anywhere else in the world. Radio is also doing particularly well. So it's well worth a good read. And The Infinite Dial is a really good piece of research that is deliberately built to be comparable across different countries. So worth a peek of that. And Pod News has some market data slides, which if you're presenting about podcasting, then you can just steal and use. And you'll find that we've updated those as well.
Boostergram
Corner
on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's our favourite time of the show, Boostergram Corner. Now, I was listening to Rob and Todd on the New Media Show, and they were saying that there's quite a few less boosts going on at the moment, and that's certainly the case for us as well. We only got 2 sets of boosts, and actually one of them wasn't even for this show. Was for another show as part of the Pod News network called Pod Clock, which, if you've not heard it, is a gripping and exciting podcast which is all about time. It's just me telling you the time. But Mike Dell sent 250 sats to it saying, this feed is value for value. Cool. It is. That feed is value for value. Why not? So I'm glad that you had a listen. And I told you what time it was. And Adam Curry has also sent us a couple of boosts as well. We said that he might be shouting, and indeed he was. He was shouting with his boost button and sent us 25,000 sats, and then a further 17,500 sats, laughing at your Dutch accent, Sam, and then adds the phrase, "Wat een lekker dik ben je toch," which is Dutch for "what a nice thing you are," I discover.
Oh, right.
So there you go.
Well, all I'll say is, Adam, bedankt.
What does that mean?
Thank you.
Oh, very good. Dank u wel, I think you mean. But bedacht, is that's also a thing, is it?
We'll find out, won't we?
We will find out. He'll probably tell us. Thank you so much. If you get value out of this show, then hit that boost button. That would be very, very grateful. We just share it, Sam and I. It goes nowhere else in the Pod News empire. So that's always a very grateful thing. So thank you so much for that. We've got some people news, haven't we?
Yes, on the move, Chris Bowen, who was at Global, is now head of studios at UK and Ireland at Spotify. Congratulations, Chris. He said, I'm super excited to tell you about my new role as head of studios UK and Ireland. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'll see if we can get him on the show in a couple of weeks when he's got his feet under the table.
Yes, that would be good if he's allowed to talk to us. Jacob Kensley is also starting work in a UK podcast company. This one is Amazon Music. He is a podcast partner specialist. He used to work for Acast and for Apple, and is the first hiring for podcast partnerships at Amazon Music in the EU. Also, Cameron Moll has joined Buzzsprout, our sponsor, as VP of Design, so Buzzsprout will begin to look even more beautiful. He used to work at Meta and Pendo, whoever Pendo are. And Leo Laporte is to retire, but don't worry, he's only retiring from radio, the Tech Guy radio show, which he's been doing for quite some considerable time, almost 20 years. It's carried on over 160 radio stations in the US, and it'll end on December the 18th. They've got somebody else lined up for that show. It's changing its name and all of that, but that's a good long run. So many congratulations, Leo.
Now, if you want to find more jobs, you can do on podjobs.net. James, what can they do if they want to stick a job up there?
Yes, you can, and it's free as well. Just pop along to podjobs.net. The only rules are it has to be a paid job, because free jobs aren't jobs. Events and awards coming up. I'm very much looking forward to the Brisbane Podcasters Meetup, which is tonight, November the 25th, in South Bank in Brisbane. I'll tell you exactly where it is. It's at the Plough, which is that old pub in the middle of all of that new stuff next to the beach. And it starts at 6 in the evening. Please do come along. There's also an ABC event. It's not an ABC event. It's a Hacks and Hackers event, which is at the ABC. BBC. But anyway, that finishes at 6:30, and those folk will also be coming. So that should be quite fun. Looking forward to a beer there. And there's beers going on in Manchester as well, isn't there, Sam?
Yeah, there's a podcaster meetup in person, it says, in Manchester. So if you go to the, again, to Pod News events section, you'll be able to find the link to that as well.
Yes, and some awards and things are happening. The 27th Annual Webby Awards, of course, is happening. The final entry deadline is on December the 16th, 2022. If you want to win as many Webby Awards as I do, then you're going to have two of them, because obviously I have two of them. Not that I like to mention it. The Radio Academy has also released details of the 2023 ARIAs Awards. One of the things which is quite interesting is that they have specific judging pools for the BBC and other judging pools for commercial radio, and they've now got a judging pool for indie podcasts. So what that basically means is if you're an indie podcaster, you have more chance of winning now, which is quite interesting. So more details on that at podnews.net. And the Podfest Expo is the next big podcast event, which is in Tampa in Florida in the US, which is the same state as Buzzsprout comes from. That's on January the 26th. So if you fancy a trip to Florida and you can afford the airfares, my goodness me, the airfares, then you should go there. You'll find more events and stuff like that at pod.events, which is the Pod News events website. Guess who couldn't buy podevents.net? Me. So that's why it's there. And it's also free for you to submit your own. What's happening for you this week, Sam?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm going to try and set up a Mastodon server for the project I'm working on. I don't know why. I just thought I'd try it and see what happens. I'm playing with cross-comment as part of the podcast index thing to see how that might work. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm also, finally, it has been teased out for far too long. Next week, I will have the first episode of Sam Talks Technology launched. Nice. So on the 7th of December, I will be doing that first show. So thank you for that.
Very good. Who's on that first show, Sam? Are you able to tell us? Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Rook and a couple of other VCs who are dealing with Satoshi-based startups, so Smiles and Stacker News and various others. So I'm just looking at why and how people are investing into value-for-value enabled platforms and where the micropayment system is going. So you might have a little bit of Olby in there as well.
Well, very nice. For me, I've been down in Sydney, as I mentioned earlier. So I went down to the Australian Podcast Awards, which was lovely, but very, very crowded. And I felt very uncomfortable with all of this COVID stuff going on. But still, it was fun. And I ended up recording Monday's Pod News from the bar next to where the event was going on, which was where all of the people who just won awards were going for their celebratory bottle of champagne. And that was a lovely, positive place to be. So I very much enjoyed that. That was good fun. And also saw a few other people while I was down in Sydney. Got back last night, absolutely knackered, as is always the case. But that's all good. And one of the other things that I've been working quite hard is just making sure that I've got rid of my Mastodon server, because it's a nightmare to run, hugely expensive, way over technologied. It's a complete waste of time, effort, and everything else. So I've switched over to Pleroma, which is much more simple, runs on far smaller boxes, far more scalable. It's a very good thing, so I would highly recommend that. But that's the other thing that I've been doing. Oh, Mastodon.
So maybe I won't be starting a Mastodon server then. Maybe I should.
No, go for it. Go for it, and you will probably learn exactly the same. I mean, one of the big things about so Mastodon sucks in all of the media that you are looking at in your feed, copies it all onto its own hard drive for reasons. Whereas Pleroma doesn't do any of that, so your hard drive doesn't immediately fill up. I ended up, it was something like, 25 gigs worth of data that was being stored on some Amazon S3 drive that I ended up having to spin up just because it's just a nightmare. It's absolute nightmare. So Pleroma is a good thing. I should have listened to John Chidgey from the podcast index.social when he was telling me not to do a Mastodon server, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't listen. But anyway, so that's what I've been doing today. So that's fun, and that's it for this week, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You can give us feedback using email at weekly@podnews.net or send us a boostergram. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Don't forget their Black Friday sale, studiodragonfly.com. Our voiceover is Sheila D. She doesn't have a Black Friday sale on. And we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.